I'd like to introduce to you Andrew Brock from Unity. He's going to be talking about Unity Mediation, monetization that grows with you. Please give him a warm PG Connects welcome.
My name is Andrew Brock, and this is my first presentation in 2 years. So it's pretty exciting. Excited to be here. And contrary to the intro here, the slide will say, you need mediation, monetization that grows with you. That is not what we're talking about today, per se. Think of it as our advert. We are going to talk about the challenges that developers have been coming to us over the last 1.5 years that actually led to us launching You Need Mediation. And we're going to talk about some questions that maybe you should think about for yourself as you work through these challenges. And if you're a partner who developers use, try to think about how you can help your developers answer these questions for your services. Currently, I run product for our UA and monetization products. But I've been in engineering, I've been in BI, I've been in a variety of places. I have not built and launched a game like you all have, a lot of you have, so something I'm missing. I built apps, but I was too nervous to always launch them. It's a big step to go from building to having to support. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit in the presentation. Post-IDFA deprecation. It hasn't really impacted Unity too much, I would say, but Unity is just a portion of what you guys use to monetize, right? And so it has impacted developers overall, for sure, right? I mean, obviously, like, if you go from, probably 40% opt-out rates to 80% opt-out rates or something like that, like, you're going to see an impact there. So there's definitely been changes that have happened. I'm actually more curious to learn from you at this conference if, with those changes that have happened, like, how are you thinking about changing your monetization strategies, to react to them? To sort of keep your margins where you want them, and keep your games, profitable. So I talked about this already. This is who I am. It's a picture. A little less facial hair there. I talked about this a little bit, like wide mouse mediation. Again, not the purpose of the conversation, but I really just want to stress that this is why, high level. And mentioned before, game creation is the core, but there's more to game success than the creation itself, right? And then I mentioned before that noticing these challenges, and this is really why we entered the space. So here we're going to walk through really quickly change regulation, which your question was about, consolidation, which no one really asked about, but I brought it up anyways. Turn time spent, which Kate just asked about, and then sort of increasing complexity. And I'm going to go fast because half my time's already up. Okay, so again, like regulations here, you could think privacy, but it's not just privacy, right? You can also think acronyms: GDPR, LGPD, CPPA, COPPA. What's important to understand here is that there's actions that we can and cannot do, things we have to adhere to as an industry with these. And the questions I'd ask you in this room would be, do you know all these regulations? Yeah, great. And do you know like the details of them? And if not, do you have a legal counsel to help you sort of understand what's coming down the pipe and what it might mean? Do you know that these change all the time? Like there was I think a ruling a few weeks ago where they reinterpreted some of what these mean. So we have to make sure that we're on top of what's actually happening and always changing these. And most people that I know don't answer yes to both the questions of do you know all the regulations, details, or do you have a legal counsel to help you out with them? So if you're in that boat, like how do you stay compliant? How do you know your partners are compliant? One suggestion I would have for you in the room as developers and for you as partners is look to the recent past. I think two good examples for privacy are iOS 14, which we had a year to prepare for, and PIPL, which we had about a month to prepare for, right? So if you look at your partners, you look at yourselves, did your partners give you the information you needed, in a timely manner to actually react to those? Did they themselves react to those regulations in a way that minimize impact to your businesses? Look at the technical documentation, look at the resource centers. When you're choosing partners, work with partners, making sure that they're on top of these, because privacy is only going to get more and more important. It's not going to get less important. All right, second, industry consolidation. it seems like not a week goes by where we don't hear about another massive announcement of somebody acquiring somebody. And we get questions from developers on what does this mean for them. I'm not saying consolidation is bad or anything, and I'm not necessarily saying that you shouldn't work with people that consolidate. I'm just mentioning that there are a lot of consolidations happening from studios and ad tech and massive tech, and we're hearing people ask questions about them. And I would, as a developer, as a partner that's doing acquisitions, I guess, like if your goal is to be acquired, which some studios have that goal, it's a great time for you. Go sell yourself. It's amazing, right? If you're a studio that is acquiring new capabilities, new technology, that's great for you as well. I applaud your success. But if you're one of those developers that isn't looking to get acquired and you're worried about what do these acquisitions mean for you, now just think about, and as your partners get acquired that you rely on, right? I would think about like what the long-term motives might be for these acquisitions, and what your sort of long-term goals are and your sort of values. And if there is risk to those, just make sure you put protections in for yourself, to make sure that your long-term interests are also taken into account as industry changes. Cool. Return on time spent. We sort of went into this already in detail, so I'm not going to go over it in too much detail other than saying that there's a lot of complexity in the industry, a lot of new information coming. How do you educate yourself? Find partners who can help educate you. The second thing is, and many of you probably know this already, is that your needs for monetization change over time. If you look at the typical sort of adoption life cycle of a game, you tend to have a pretty nice, for a successful game at least, you tend to have like a nice massive bump in the initial as you do paid UA followed by organic installs as the game takes off, right? You usually hit some sort of peak point, depending on if it's hyper casual or hardcore, like it changes how long that peak is, right? And then you see a degrade of a varying sort of degree. And what's important to understand is that return on time spent. You get a different return based on the complexity of your monetization based off of like where you are in this curve. For example, if you have the example I just gave with your company, right? If you have 100 users or 10 users, it's probably not worth putting in a complicated ad strategy, right? If you have 1 million users, it's probably worth it. So you have to understand, like as a developer, when does it make sense to sort of scale your ad strategy and your time you're putting into it, or your UA strategy, and when does it make sense to sort of scale it back again to make sure that you're getting the return on your time spent? Because, my perspective, maybe from what I've heard, like your focus is in development, building the game, building an experience. Monetization is something you want to do, but any time you take away from your core drive, you have to make sure you're doing it with intent and purpose. Cool. And the last thing, increasing complexity. This is what we just talked about is goals. Like, I always hate it when I hear people say that the goal of monetization is to maximize it. You can easily maximize monetization by taking all the guardrails away, right? And the goal with monetization, or the goal of a game, especially today, is changing. Like there are 4 or 5 goals that I've heard that developers are sort of managing towards. There's more than just this. And even monetization itself is complicated. There's ad monetization, the various types we talked about today. There is IAP monetization, right? There's pay to play, subscription we talked about. There's even play to earn now, right? How are you thinking about balancing all these strategies in your own games, with your own games? And you'll basically find partners who can help you measure and balance these. Cool. So 25 seconds left. I'm good? Ah, sweet. All right, I have time. All right. Well, I ran through this all. Cool. More time for questions. It's going to be great. So anyway, so in summary, just really, you think about your partners, picking the right partner, here's some challenges, ask yourself these questions, ask them these questions. If you're a partner in this room, think about how you can help your developers answer these questions for you, right? To give them the sort of confidence that they can be successful with you. And then lastly, I'll say it one more time because I think it's really worth repeating. We do really believe the world is a better place with more creators. We are invested in your success. In terms of our mediation product, there's a case study coming out with Paradigm. They have a great game where you break things. I like breaking things. I recommend reading this when it comes out. It talks a little bit about how we're helping address these challenges with our mediation product. And then lastly, shameless plug here, please follow these links if you are interested in learning about either a mediation product or our other Unity gaming services products. You can also email these emails here. Also, we have another session tomorrow on multiplayer 101, which is one of our game services. Totally recommend you guys come here for that. I love questions, so hit them.
Would you ever have a view where that'll say, because performance marketers take up the biggest chunk of demand on games, would you ever have a view where that'll say, okay, a user saw these ads and that resulted in so much churn, so that we could potentially block those advertisers in the future?
Yeah, so, well, would Unity ever have a product that does that? I can't answer that here. But what I would say is that I think that trust and safety is super important for games, right? And it's especially when you're thinking about putting third-party content in your game, right? So you're seeing a lot of tools come out. Safety K required by App 11, I believe, has some of this functionality of determining what's safe to run or not. We have our own sort of ad review center, which sort of shows like the impacts creatives have on your games in terms of how much creatives are worth. It doesn't show the churn that they show, but I think understanding the impacts of what you're running has on your users is super important. So again, like we're not here to talk about necessarily the mediation there in this presentation because I think that's not as valuable to your time. Because I don't want to sell my product right now to you all. I'll do that after this presentation for sure. I really want to sell sort of what you should be thinking about. Now, in terms of a mediation, why did Unity go into it? As I mentioned, there's a lot of challenges we're seeing in the industry the last 1.5 years that developers are coming to us with, and the sense is that the industry isn't meeting their needs, right? And when you think about Unity and our core value and why we exist, and you hear JR say this, you'll hear everybody say this, and you might think it's marketing bullshit, but it's true. We really do believe the world is a better place with more creators in it, right? And our goal is to democratize, it's a buzzword, whatever, but our goal is to make creators successful. And you can't just be successful by creating, right? Creation is the core, but you got to do more, right? You have to operate your game. You have to find users to come experience what you built, right? You have to, manage the experience within your game when they're playing it, so they have the experience, the story you want them to experience, right? And you got to find ways to generate cash flow from them. I mean, some companies, yes, they want to just go and like milk as much money as they can from customers, but that's not every developer, right? A lot of developers don't want ads in the game, right? They want to only put them in enough to make enough money to keep them in business and keep the development going for the next thing, right? So why you need mediations? Because again, like we saw these challenges in the industry, and our goal is to make sure developers are successful. And in order to do that, we needed mediation as a piece of what we're building, right? In order to really help developers work through these things we're going to talk about, like the privacy stuff that you mentioned, right? Like the consolidation that's happening in the industry right now, like the fact that like games are becoming more interconnected in the service teams, right? Like I think you mentioned that ads were the last thing you did. I imagine that if your studio, monetization probably was not that important. You're probably thinking about other metrics that you cared about, right? And for the last 10, 15 years, like monetization teams are separate from the rest of the organization. That's right. But now they're starting to meld together, right? And how do you help them meld together and optimize towards company goals while maximizing their monetization within those other company goals? That's where Unity Mediation is going, and that's the differentiator we're going to bring.
So with that in mind, do you think that, Unity is bringing a different approach because they're putting it directly into the development, whereas before, as we just said, it is something that comes at the end, or it's a separate department or whatever. I'm thinking from a designer perspective, because obviously my day job is that I'm a designer. What I want to know is, I suppose, how do you seamlessly put that in? As a designer, you've already got to have a brain to be able to, and we don't have brains as game designers, you've already got to have a brain about advertising to be able to make that happen inside the game.
I love that you're bringing that question up because that's spoiler for the thing. So there are 4 problems we're going to talk about, right? So the first one is the privacy changes. Regulation changes because it's more than privacy, right? The second one was, mine's blanking right now, consolidation that's happening and what that means for developers. You know, Monetisation you need different. We don't own a studio, right? We're not planning to own a studio, at least to my knowledge. You know, if we ever did get a studio, it'd probably be for reasons that we wanted to be able to make better products, not because we wanted to compete, right? And the third one is what you just mentioned, is your return on time spent. Like, again, like most developers, maybe not those in this room because you're in Monetisation, but most developers, like, they're not thinking about ads, they're not thinking about monetization, right? And there's a lot of things changing. So the first gentleman up here mentioned the tutorial ads, a new format. It's a very interesting thing. You know, Thor just mentioned in-play ads, new format, very interesting, right? How do you learn about these? You know, and then if you learn about them, how do you know when it makes sense to go do the work to implement them? When are you going to get the return on your time? If you have a game with 10 players, no offense, Thor, but if you have 10 players, it might not make sense putting play games into your game yet, because you're not going to get the return. But when that grows, and you have 1 million players, it probably makes a lot of damn sense, right? So how do you get that information out there? And honestly, that's something that we're still working through. Like, how can we help developers know that and solve that? We're trying to do it through simplification. You know, bring things, make monetization easy for people that aren't focused on it, right? And the second thing I think is through education, and that's harder. Like, what are the right forms and forums to educate appropriately? Yeah, so yeah, I would challenge companies like your company to think about that as well. Is like, how can we make this easy? How can we make education easy and accessible? This is a great forum for it, by the way. But you can't be a pocket gamer every week, you know. So how can you find it when you're not here?
It's got to come from a place as well, I think, where it's more sophisticated. Because when you are at the kind of seed of the game development cycle,
yeah,
that sophistication, I keep reiterating that design process, but it is super important that we don't just like throw that away either. There has to be a sophisticated relationship between the two parties, Unity and me.
Yep. I've been in ad tech for slightly over 10 years, so pretty long time, but I'm still learning. It sort of moves really, really fast. And I guess the other major thing to understand about me, which many of you may find controversial, is that I love ads. I think ads are good. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Now, I don't love it when people overuse ads. I think somebody talked about banners in the old days and how they were annoying, right? And the offer walls and stuff, right? And I don't like it when people do excessive tracking of users. I read an article yesterday about some company that was looking at tracking eyeballs to see if you're looking at the ad or not. That's probably going to get regulated. You shouldn't do that. When we think about the transformation that the world's gone through over the past 20-some years, the rise of the internet, the rise of the smartphone, the rise of people out of poverty in third world countries and developing countries, it's all because of ad tech, right? Ad tech as means to monetize has created a profitable business model that allowed creators like yourselves, just independent small studios, to build and launch websites, games that have transformed our experiences. So I love ads. I think they're great, and I look forward to helping you all monetize with them.